Vice President J.D. Vance had his first interview since taking office. It was with Margaret Brennan. It was adversarial. And let's put our biases aside. I have to give credit where it's due. As someone who's progressive leaning, I think that J.D. Vance did quite well. He held his own. He was an aggressive defender of Trump in this interview, and that's a difficult thing to do, to defend Trump. He had to do it on the campaign trail, and now he has to do defense for President Trump and Trump's nominees for the cabinet. So first, they discussed Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth, of course, was just confirmed by J.D. Vance as the tie-breaking vote to be defense secretary. And J.D. Vance framed Pete Hegseth as a disruptor of basically endless wars, neoconservative and neoliberal foreign policies, although he did not use those exact words in that entire interview. But that was the general sense that I got. And it's something that a lot of Trump supporters will argue. I think that this is great framing because he's sort of right in a broad sense that Pete Hegseth is a disruptor. I mean, we know that on a personal level, he's a disruptor. He disrupted his own marriages by engaging in extramarital affairs. But yeah, he's an outsider. He's seen as an outsider. He's a host from TV. He's never been a politician per se. He's never been in elected office. So yeah, Vance pitches him as this guy who's going to be able to relate to the men and women in uniform, say that he's able to empathize with them, and saying that he's not going to send them off to die in war. And I think that's a good way to frame it. Again, it's very difficult to defend someone like Pete Hegseth, who has a drinking problem and who engages in infidelity and who's a Fox News host and has apparently chanted about killing Muslims at a bar. He was allegedly found doing that. So yeah, he's got tons of baggage, but J.D. Vance, he's gone to law school. He knows how to defend people. He did a great job at essentially being Hegseth's defense attorney in this interview. So that was really good framing from him. The sophistry was on point. It was also well done when he talked about immigration and refugees. So they were discussing that policy. Of course, ICE is starting to go around the country. Mass deportations may be getting fired up soon. Tom Homan, Trump's border czar, is a really aggressive guy in terms of advocating for deportations. So the Trump administration policy-wise is going on the offense, but Trump's team has to kind of play defense and defend these policy decisions when Democrats, people in the media, anyone just points out, hey, this might have adverse effects on the economy. This seems too draconian. This might be unconstitutional or illegal. So Vance is playing defense. He's talking about some of the problems with having some of these people in the country, some of the dangers. Margaret Brennan, again, being very adversarial. Vance brings up this apparently a refugee who was plotting a terrorist attack that he said Democrats said was properly vetted. And he was saying, the point was he was not properly vetted. Then Margaret Brennan got a little bit into the details with him and said, well, we don't know if he was radicalized before he came here or after he came here. Now, obviously, that is material. That is important. If he got radicalized after he came here, that means that the vetting was more likely well done than if they knew that he was radicalized while they vetted him and they still let him in the country to begin with. But I think that Vance's response to her, although it was kind of emotion-based, it was well done at the same time. He said, I don't really care. I don't want this person in the country. He said, I don't really care, Margaret. And there's a lot of people on the right making memes of that now, applauding him for that remark. He says, I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want this person in the country. And I think most Americans agree with me. And yeah, that is kind of the bottom line point, is that, okay, the fact is he did something terrible. Why should we want him in the country to begin with? Why should we want him in the country? And so he used that to swat aside Margaret Brennan's legitimate point about vetting and how we don't know when he was radicalized. So yeah, I thought that was masterfully done. He did a good job appealing to regular Americans with that remark, not getting overly granular and overly into the details. Sometimes that stuff pays off. And we've seen that that's how Trump and his team kind of operate, is appealing to people's surface level impulses of, oh, you don't want bad people in the country, right? Yeah, okay, cool. Time for mass deportations. That's the way they've tended to operate. So really good framing from Vance. It's frustrating to see because, yeah, again, I'm not Trump or Vance sympathetic. And I think this might be rhetoric that really solidifies the right-wing base and might win over independents. People might see that and think, oh, he won that exchange. They talked about the pardon of January 6ers. Now, I think this is something that's really hard to defend Trump on. I think J.D. Vance did fairly well with it, maybe not as well as he did with other issues, but Trump did a blanket pardon for January 6th rioters, including violent people. And so J.D. Vance has to defend that. So Margaret Brennan was like, is it ever justified to be violent against police officers? And Vance said, well, no, but listen. And then he twisted it to kind of talk about the unfair procedure, violations of due process. And I think that was masterful. Look, he went to Yale Law School. I went to law school. I know how this stuff is done, the whole procedure thing. If you can win on procedural arguments, you can sometimes score as good a victory as if you had won on the substance. So he was arguing, no, they violated procedure. This is unconstitutional. He was arguing that Merrick Garland's Department of Justice was corrupt, politicized, weaponized. That's a common right-wing talking point, but it's fairly reliable to use as just like something you slap onto any argument, really, when it comes to pardoning people and essentially being anti-law and order. It's ironic because they purport to be in favor of law and order, and yet they'll pardon people who acted so unlawfully when those people agreed with them politically. But of course, they won't say, oh, we're just pardoning them because they agree with us politically and we like them. We're pardoning them because these due process violations, because things went very wrong. It was unconstitutional the way they went after them. This is a weaponized, politicized DOJ. So yeah, it's great red meat for his base. I think if you're a Republican, if you're someone who voted for Trump and you watched that interview, you were probably pretty impressed. I would imagine that. And I was only impressed in the sense that I think his rhetoric and his arguments, his sophistry were on point. And I wish that Democrats at the moment had someone who was sharp enough, or I guess I'm not saying they're not sharp. There are plenty of sharp Democrats, but that could really play defense as effectively for Biden, as well as J.D. Vance can play defense for Trump. Because in my opinion, it's far harder to play defense for Donald Trump than it is for Joe Biden. As flawed as Joe Biden may be, Donald Trump is in a whole new league. But yet, Kamala Harris didn't defend Joe Biden all that well. Members of the Democratic Party, except for a few, like maybe Gavin Newsom, didn't really defend Joe Biden very well at all. So, yeah, this is something that's really interesting to watch because, as I've discussed, J.D. Vance would be a prime candidate for 2028. He'd be what's called the heir apparent candidate. One of my professors in my undergrad wrote a book on the heir apparent president. So he'd be the heir apparent to Donald Trump, the George H.W. Bush to Trump's Reagan, the Harry Truman to Trump's FDR. And we got to keep an eye on him in 2028, learn how to counter him because, yeah, he's sharp. He is. He didn't have any embarrassing moments like Donald Trump had in his interview with Kristen Welker after he got elected, where he said, we have concepts of a plan about his healthcare plan. Totally embarrassing. I kind of would have liked to see Margaret Brennan bring that up to J.D. Vance and see him squirm and try to defend the idea of Trump saying he has concepts of a plan as some sort of amazing affirmative policy agenda because they attacked Kamala Harris so much for not focusing on policy. And yet at the same time, their boy was saying, oh, we just have concepts of a plan. That's really cool, right, guys? So yeah, I think Margaret Brennan did an okay job, although she may have lost in terms of getting too details focused and not pressing Vance in quite the right areas. The January 6th pardon is a big deal, but January 6th was now over 4 years ago. I do feel like Americans are ready to move on from it. I do feel like it's time for Democrats to start talking policy. The border thing, again, Republicans talk a good game on it. Democrats, they need to rise up to the occasion and make the arguments against them. And it doesn't seem like they're doing a great job at it. Healthcare, that's a strong issue for the Democrats. I'm surprised she did not bring that up. Climate change as well. Climate change is a very important issue. I mean, there are wildfires raging across the country right now. Margaret Brennan did not bring that up. And that's one of those issues where J.D. Vance squirms a little bit. You may remember in his debate with Tim Walz, he referred to climate science as weird science, and he gave a very bizarre answer that definitely was unlike what he normally gives. So yeah, that's my assessment of the interview. Well done to J.D. Vance, credit where it's due. I disagree with him on a lot of policy, but I think he made a good case. His sophistry was on point. Credit to Margaret Brennan on only some things, but I think her interviewing left quite a bit to be desired. I know I'm Monday morning quarterbacking, but That's just the way I saw it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think that I was too kind to JD Vance? Do you think that I was too harsh on him? Do you think I was too harsh on Margaret Brennan? Let me know. Please like, comment, or subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video. The Morris the Merrier, out.